Good afternoon. Actually, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Model Man Frank here. How is everybody doing today? We're over here in the Florida center part of the state, barreling down. Is Hurricane Milton or Tropical Storm Milton is maybe by the time you watch this, wherever you're at, it'll be Hurricane Milton. Last week, 2 weeks almost now. Oh, almost last week, 2 weeks or so. Yeah, we had to deal with Elena, and then we had to deal with all the issues that Elena left behind, especially in the Carolinas, where it's understandable if you can't get to a way to watch because you don't have power. And praying for you all out there in the Carolinas. Pray for us down here as Milton gets closer. Tonight's broadcast, we're going to talk about some of the Cold War bombers, specifically the ones that came after 1945. That's when the Cold War really started to heat up. And really, did the Cold War end when they say it did? I don't think it did. I just think it went on a pause. And it's still going on as we see it today. It's just morphed into something else. One thing I really would like to say to y'all is I know I was going to work on my plane. I have the plane sitting there. Today I was playing around with my 3D printer, trying to perfect it. Because eventually, as I go along with the 3D printer, I would like to build an airplane from the 3D printer. So I made a couple bookmarks, one for my wife, actually two for my wife. And the 3D printer is it's smooth on one side, but it's not finishing up on the smooth on the other side. So I'm still perfecting it and perfecting the art of 3D printing. It's a work in progress. It's a cool hobby. There's so many things you can do with it. There's so many additives, so many different projects that people have put out there. Some of them I'd like to download and create, like my own engine mounts. There's a couple of engine mounts people have made. And you can make your own stuff too, which is really cool also, and I'd like to really get into that. Still working with the balsa, still working with the foam board, but 3D print allows me to only have to afford to buy receivers, or transmitters. I don't need to buy a transmitter, I got a transmitter. Just need to buy a receiver and buy a battery occasionally and buy the ESCs to power the motors. And that's it. Everything else I got. So, if I can 3D print all my components, that'll be even better. And from what I see, there's a lot of things you can do with a 3D printer that you can't do anywhere with anything else. So it's a whole other medium, and I hope to be able to share it with you as I go along. But this is what I played around with this little bookmark. I had some signs that I had made. Three little cats looking at you saying, "Are you pooping?" Because animals, when you're in the restroom, your animals always come and see you to see what you're doing. So I printed one out. It didn't come out the way I had it. I had it in our bathroom for a while, and then I decided, you know what? I'm starting to get the hang of how this works. Let me print another one. And I tried printing another one. It didn't. It came out better, but it didn't come out the way I wanted it. So I threw that one out. I still have the print, and I can print another one, which I'll eventually do once I perfect it. Once I perfect it perfectly, then I'll print another one out. So, as you can see on the screen is the link, or I'll put a link in the description box. Please follow me over on Patreon. It is a There is a fee to join. I was putting up free stuff, but I really would like you guys to, join the Patreon group. Best way to talk to me. It's a very low monthly fee. It helps the channel out. It helps me out to create more content to put on this channel. And you guys are just, great that you subscribe and you watch this. And I really do appreciate you watch it, But it helps me out even more so that I can share even more with y'all on Patreon. So if you can follow me over there, it'd be greatly appreciative. Let's get one down with the show tonight, huh? So has anybody seen anything that happened this week on aviation? Not much, really. Wasn't, I haven't seen much at all in terms of what has been going on in aviation. Yeah, I haven't really seen much. I have been posting some stuff. I was able to go finally to the flying field and do some flying with my friends up over there at Avon Park Aero Modelers. Saw that Greg Glasgow, Fat Guy Flies RC. Greg over at Fat Guy Flies RC is posting some stuff up. He has the J10 out and the F9 Cougar. We're going to talk not about the F9 or the J10. J10's what? Supposedly a 5th generation fighter, but it's a Chinese fighter. It's not really a Generation 10. And not only that, it looks like a copy of the Lava F-16 morph from the Israeli jet. And but that's my opinion. I don't see, everybody has their own opinion, right? So we're going to start our broadcast out here tonight with the B-47. Now, if you guys have actually, we're going to start it off actually with the B-29. We're going to start it off with the Peacemaker. No, I'm sorry. Let's recorrect that. The B-29, which became the B-50. Now, the B-50 was an upgrade of the B-29. It had more powerful engines. There's the B-50. It's basically a B-29 with bigger motors. The B-50, it was called the Super Fortress, just like the B-29 before it. The first flight for the B-50 was in 1947. And then it was used extensively through the time of Korea. It was used as the B-29, but it was also used as the B-50. Also, B-29s were used alongside of it. The B-50 was used in different variety of roles. It was actually outfitted with more powerful Pratt & Whitney motors, the R-4360 radial engines. The structure was beefed up. It had a taller tail and other improvements. It was literally the last of that size World War II era bombers to fly with the fleet. A total of 370 of the aircraft, and it had a total bomb load of 12,700. So that was that aircraft. Now moving on to the next one was the B-36 Peacemaker. I'm going to show you what the Peacemaker looked like. Oops. Let me bring up the photo of the Peacemaker. Now, the Peacemaker had... There's a great movie out there with Jimmy Stewart. And y'all know which one I'm talking about if you're into aviation and watching the aviation movies. The B-36 is pretty much the star of the first half of the film. A lot of aircraft are in that film, and it's a really cool movie. It kind of shows what American pilots were dealing with just leaving the Army Air Forces and going into the Army Air Force, separated from the Army, and became its own entity in 1947, becoming the U.S. Air Force. So the U.S. Air Force, having its new identity, wanted to be able to have their own funding, and they ended up buying B-36 Peacemakers. There was a big problem with the Peacemaker, and there was, in the movie, they were talking about the Peacemaker. You see how massive the aircraft is. As you can see here, the Peacemaker had 6 engines, 6 piston engines. And if you see on the outer sponsons, on the outer tips of the wing, you have 4 jet engines, 2 on each side. And when the plane was sitting on the ground, it was known as 6 turning, 4 burning. We're ready for takeoff. The B-36 lacked in power as a pusher. When it first flew, or the first concept that came out, had the aircraft, had the motors turned in the opposite direction. The only thing is that it just lacked the power. So they put them as a pusher configuration, and then the plane just didn't have enough power to take off. So they added the jet engines. The problem was with this is that you had diesel, okay, which was kerosene. You had to have 2 more tanks. You had to have jet fuel to carry for the jet engines. And you had to carry regular avgas for the pistons. So basically, the aircraft, let me bring it up here so you can really see a little bit better of the airplane. You don't have to look at me all the time, right? So the plane was first flight of that aircraft was actually before the B-50, and it was in 1946. A total of 385 of these aircraft were built. Okay, the total bomb load for that plane was more than the B-52, at 39,600 pounds. That's a lot. The aircraft also had the same gun placement and the radio control system as the B-29. It had a different sight on it. Now, if you're ever watching movie Strategic Air Command, they talk about this, a lot of the stuff, and it's pretty darn accurate. The airplane itself, okay, in terms of, it only lasted, the plane flew from 1946, from its first flight, to 1959. Actually, into 1960. Were the last when they disappeared. Had a service ceiling of 40,000 feet. But it had an Achilles heel. And it was a great transition plane for the Air Force going into Bomber Command. But the Achilles heel that it had was the tanks and the fuel would often mix, or the fuel tanks would leak, the motors would leak, and you had a lot of fires breaking out on the wings. And in the Jimmy Stewart movie, Strategic Air Command, they actually make light of this, and point it out. There were many crashes of this aircraft. The plane was, and it had a very large crew. So, you had, you had your radio operators, your engineer, your bomber, you had your gunners in the back of the aircraft. And right between the bunch was that, right in that fuselage. As a matter of fact, if you're looking at the plane on the screen, there's this color, probably I would say grayish color in the middle. That was the bomb bay. The bottom half, that bulbous on the bottom of the plane, was the good evening, Peyton. How are you? was the bulb is on the bottom was a radar. This aircraft had radar. It was bigger than the B-50. It was a big plane. So it drank a lot of fuel. They used the B-36 in a number of different tests with F-84s. The problem is especially the parasite testing that they did, where they would see if an F-84 could, come up, and the Air Force's concept was that if the B-36s, as they entered into Russian airspace and they entered in an area where the fighters couldn't get to, because jet fighters only had a certain range. They couldn't keep up with the bombers. They could keep up with the bombers, but they were drinking fuel faster than the bombers were. So Strategic Air Command had this idea, hey, let's put a parasite on the bottom and we'll have a jet underneath. It's a terrible idea. Planes crashed. It kept crashing into the gantry that would hook onto the plane. And if you want to learn more about it, I'll put a link in the description box below to Dronescape. It's a YouTube channel that has a whole plethora of videos of that time period of the parasite and all the different... now, the reason they call it the parasite is because, animals sometimes have a little tick that hooks onto them, or there's a parasite on their body. Well, that's why they call the jet the parasite. So the B-36 just didn't last. It wasn't really a reliable aircraft, and Strategic Air Command wanted to go a little faster. So Boeing aircraft had came out with a new aircraft, new wing, new technology, engines slung down below, and as we all know it, as the B-47. But before the B-47 could make its debut, I'm going to show you guys one. There were some planes that came out before that were still in the testing phase, as we say. The real very first aircrafts that actually came out was this aircraft. I'm going to show it to you now. Let me do something here first. You guys know the name of this plane? Could look it up. Tell me in the comment field there. Come on, guys. You know which aircraft this is, do you? Anyone? Going once? Going twice? In 1947, North American came up with this jet aircraft. This was the aircraft before the B-47. A total of 143 aircraft of this type were made. It had a 10,000-pound bomb load. This was America's first jet bomber. This is the North American B-45 Tornado. It was actually known as a reconnaissance bomber, but essentially it was designed as a bombing aircraft, but later became a reconnaissance aircraft. The aircraft was in service. It was in service from April 22, 1948. First flight was in 47. Introduction date was 1948, and then retired at the same time as the B-36. The B-45, which this aircraft was superseded by the B-47. The B-47, if you've seen pictures of the B-47, was a total departure than what this aircraft was. Many of the aspects that you see in German design of, like the Arado, the 243 I think it is, was this plane. The Arado AR-234, I'm sorry, the 234. The 234 had the engines in the wing, just like that. You guys can look up the Arado 234, which was the Nazi German aircraft. The Germans had the very first strategic bombing aircraft, jet aircraft. And the Arado was it. So, Cold War was going on, and, this aircraft was making its debut. And the next aircraft I'm going to bring up is the B-47. But I'm going to show you guys the picture of it. So, pretty cool aircraft, not knowing that you guys probably didn't even know that this happened, that this aircraft was the first. So, I know I said about the, oh, you know what? Before I go any further, reminded myself. Last week, we were talking about the Korean War. And I made a mistake that it was the P-82 that shot down the MiG. The P-82 shot down a Yak-7 fighter. Okay, it was a Yak-7 that they got into the fight, and that was the very first shots that were fired during the Korean War. The first aircraft to shoot down a MiG-15 was an F-4U, a Corsair. I don't know how I could have made that mistake, but I wanted to rectify the situation and rectify that tidbit of history. My Roots of E was correct in that. She had posted it down. The F-4U Corsair was the very first aircraft to shoot down a MiG-15. It was a very powerful radial engine, and basically the MiG-15 made a mistake of flying straight, and he was able to shoot it down. So that mistake was on my part, but yes, the P-82, which was the F-82 Twin Mustang, was the first to shoot down a Russian or a North Korean Yak 7 in combat. It was the Russian pilot that was flying the Yak in the combat role during the Korean War. So I just wanted to bring that into here and let you guys know that was my mistake. I just wasn't thinking clearly when I made that that talk about in there, and I wanted to rectify that. So going on, we're going to talk about the B-47. Now, if you go on Strategic Air Command, you will see the B-47 along with the B-45 and B-36s. You'll see the B-36 in the background on one of the shots that they show. I think it's Love Field, and they show a B-45 sitting on the tarmac, or I think it's a MacDill, because they filmed it at MacDill Air Force Base and a couple of other different Air Force bases. They shot film on, and in one of the shots in the background, you see this aircraft, the B-45, the Tornado. So watch the film. You can. I believe the film is available on Amazon. Don't quote me on that. It could be available for free. You can watch it most likely on Amazon. Excuse me. Or you can go on YouTube and watch it there. But the B-47... Oh, wow, I don't have a picture of the B-47. But y'all know what the B-47 is. It's a very famous aircraft. I really don't need to show it to y'all because everybody knows what it looks like. It was one thing about the B-47 that probably would stand out to y'all is the fact that they had the same swept wing technology as the 707 or the Dash 80 that would come out later on. It had the swept back wings. It had the engine pylons. Now, it had teething problems. Some of them had issues where the engine would fall off. Pilot would be flying along, and all of a sudden, boom, there goes the engine. The only thing is some of them were doing it during takeoff roll. The engine would rip off and, of course, tear all the hydraulic lines, and the plane would crash, killing the pilot, the crew of 3. It was the captain, first officer, and the bombardier, or radio operator, radar operator. The pilots sat on the top of the aircraft in a 1-2 configuration, one in front of the other. And then down below, there were little compartments next to the pilots. And then in front was the radio/radar operator, and he would also operate the tail gun in the back. The plane was unique. How you doing, Norm? Thanks for joining us. In that aspect of having 6 engines. It had 2 main engines in the center, and then outer sponson engines also. So it was a 6-engine aircraft. It was new technology. It was a fast and slick-looking plane. But again, just like everything in the Air Force and jet technology being so new, it had teething issues. There is supposedly a story where one aircraft actually lost its nuclear payload. These planes flew around the country with a nuclear bomb load on board. Always at the ready, always ready to go to war. And this aircraft actually had to drop the bomb because he had to make it back to base because he was loaded. So the guy lost the bomb. And supposedly it crashed somewhere in the Georgia swampland. I don't know if anybody ever found the bomb. Will it ever go off? I don't know. Can't really make that prediction here, but I guess we'll find out someday. So, yeah, that was the B-47. I bet you guys don't know. I'm going to show you guys one airplane that you probably have seen photos of it. There was so much in terms of Cold War technology and jet propulsion that was being thrown into bomber technology. When we were just... So the B-52 was coming up, and Convair had to compete against the B-52. So the B-36, of course, was a flop. It only lasted maybe 10 or 11 years. And this is the B-60, the ex-B-60. Convair's attempt at making a strategic intercontinental bomber, jet bomber. Has anybody noticed what's the same similarities to which aircraft? Anyone? I'll give you guys a interesting hint on what that plane looks like right there in a moment. But if you are looking at the plane and you're looking at that XB60, it was a heavy bomber, and it first flew on April 18th, 1952. It was actually competing against the Boeing B-52, which eventually won the contract. What Convair did is they took a B-36 Peacemaker, pretty much used the same fuselage, different tail, and different wing configuration to make a 4-engine jet bomber. And, of course, we all know what history wrote. There was only one aircraft built. There was another one being produced after it. You can actually see the B-36 sitting in the background in the photo. And this pretty much bankrupted Convair, and eventually ended up becoming another casualty. I think it became part of Boeing, or later became part of McDonnell Douglas or Lockheed. But as we all know, McDonnell Douglas disappeared, they became Boeing, and now we just have three major aircraft manufacturers in this country: Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing McDonnell Douglas, which McDonnell Douglas does not exist anymore. It's now Boeing. So, but that was a bomber that was thought of, and they were like, "Yep, we're gonna win the contract. It's a shoe in. Don't worry. Let's go ahead and build another airplane." Oops, guess what? We lost the contract. So, as we're going along here, we're gonna talk about another plane here, and this one, 116 of these planes were built. And it was America's real first high altitude supersonic jet fighter, or jet bomber. And it was also built with the principle you could fly high with it, but man, did it suck fuel like crazy. It had to carry a huge fuel tank with it everywhere it went. Let me pull this one down here. And I'm going to bring up our next star in this repertoire of aircraft rolls that we're doing here, of the catwalk of jet bomber technology during the Cold War. A sexy looking beast here of a plane. And I'm going to bring it up here on the screen. It's going to cover my face. You guys don't need to see my face, right? We all know the name of this plane. Do we all know the name of the plane? The B-58 Hustler, man. It hustled like crazy. Carried a cannon in the back. I don't know what for. Plane was a Mach 2 bomber. Jimmy Stewart, Brigadier General Jimmy Stewart, got his Mach 2 rating in this aircraft. Jimmy Stewart was a Air Force Reserve officer. He served in World War II with distinction. Very interesting story, and I'm sure everybody knows it, but I'll tell it again. If you're ever watching It's a Wonderful Life, which I think is a great movie to watch. I think it's one of the best that he ever made. In the scene where he starts to cry, he actually is remembering, he's having a flashback of watching his friends die during World War II. Mr. Stewart flew B-24 missions when many actors were being kept from the front lines. He made it a point of flying, and he did not want to be treated any differently. So he flew on long bomber missions, and he lost many friends. And he had lots of PTSD, and he poured that out in every movie that he made. And It's a Wonderful Life is a great, great film. Please, if you ever get a chance, watch it. It's a great movie to watch with the family around Christmas time. And sometimes if you're down in the mood to watch around Christmas time, watch it around Thanksgiving. It's a great, great movie. They've colored it, but it's better to watch it in black and white. And it's kind of funny, when that movie came out, it didn't do very well in the movie theaters. But it wasn't until TV really became a thing, and in the 1960s and 70s, and they started showing it as a Christmas classic, did it start to become get a cult following. So Jimmy Stewart got his Mach 2 rating in this plane. This aircraft had a crew of 3. You had the pilot, of course, sitting in the front. You had the radio or bombardier operator in the front and the center portion, and you had your radio operator and gunner in the back that would operate that little cannon that you see in the back tail there. The fuel tank on this plane, on this bird, was massive. Also, they could be replaced with of course, a large bomb, an A bomb on the bottom of it. It had a very slender fuselage. This aircraft here was the granddaddy or the papa to the B-1 bomber, or as affectionately as everybody knows it as, the Bone. B-1 Bone. Which was also known as the Lancer, the B-1 Lancer. Came out in the 1970s, then it was canceled by the Carter administration, and then back in the 1980s, as a campaign promise, Reagan brought it into service, and now we have B-1s flying around. B-1 has a problem. We'll get into that later. Maybe we'll get into it on the next broadcast that I post. But most of you who follow aviation will know that the B-1 has issues, especially with its swing wing technology. Swing wings are really a great way to make use of Mach 2 capabilities. But when you're flying and you have to slow down, you have to swing that wing out front. And they are maintenance whores. They have to be maintained constantly, especially that swing wing. But the B-58 Hustler, very fast aircraft, very fuel hungry, because those motors that were below it guzzled a lot of fuel. It wasn't an afterburning fuel engine. This aircraft was always very fast. But this aircraft also played a role in map of the Earth. Basically, it could do low-level penetration burns at low altitude. And as you can see it there, it is flying at a lower altitude than it was actually designed to fly at. So this plane was a beast. It was a really cool plane. 116 of the aircraft were built. Introductory date was 1960. The first flight was in 1956. So 4 years it took. And they finally retired the aircraft after a good career in 1970. The aircraft never saw action, as we know. It could have seen action. We just don't know. So, excuse me. I have a little gas, guys. I'm sorry. I had some soup today, and then I drank cold water, which was really not a thing. Interesting thing about this aircraft is that it had a capsule that would wrap around the pilot. If something would happen, you would pull the lever to eject. The capsule would close in on you because you'd be flying at Mach 2. And it would shoot you out to the roof of the aircraft, and that was your escape capsule. The B-58 was the very first aircraft to incorporate that. Later models had that aircraft, and then you saw that on the B-70, the Valkyrie, which is another aircraft we need to talk about one day, but we're going to just talk about some of the stuff that I was able to look up. This was a really cool aircraft. I think it's the RC guy. He 3D printed this model and actually made an RC plane out of it. He lost control of it and crashed it. I think he said he was going to rebuild it. So we're going to go on to our next aircraft. If you guys were watching the front sticker on the front of this podcast before we went live, we had a unique aircraft on the front of it. And it is not a bomber that went into service. It was a prototype. There were probably some that were built, and I'm going to show it to you here on the screen. Whoa, too big. You know what type of plane this is, guys? Or do you know which aircraft this is? This aircraft here is the XB-50. SST-46 heavy bomber. The flight, it was a Convair aircraft. Had its first flight in 1947 and was never bought by the U.S. Air Force. It had the straight wing technology, also incorporating engine pods on the wings, like which aircraft? The Arado 234. So, as you can see, it had a 2-person crew, and there was only one ever built. Actually, I'm sorry, it had 3 people. It had the pilot in the cockpit, your co-pilot, and then you had your radio navigator. Maximum takeoff weight for this aircraft was 95,600 pounds. Empty weight was 48,000 pounds. Wing area was 1,285 square feet. Wingspan was 113 feet. The length of the aircraft was 105 feet. And the height was 27 feet tall. That was from the ground to the tail, top of the tail. It had 2 guns, which were the guns in the back and the gun in the front. Because, when these planes came out, they were still thinking, bombers were going to be flying and then fighters would be attacking them. They were still in that infancy. The aircraft that it was, the motors that were used in that were the J-35 Allisons. They were turbojet engines. They only had 4,000 pounds of thrust each. So not really a hefty plane, if you know what I mean. So, still going along. I'm going to show you guys another one here. Probably don't know too much about it, but I'm going to show it to you anyways. It was an awesome looking plane. Yeah, it was. I mean, you could probably build a model of it. I mean, it's pretty easy, straightforward. You got a fuselage and a wing. That's about it. Nope, this is not the Kitty Hawk. The next aircraft we're going to watch, and I am going to show it to you. Hold on a second. I'm trying to pick up the screen here, guys. I want to show you the next plane that we're going to look at here. Now, the Air Force had one, and so did the Navy. I'm going to show you the Air Force one first. That's the B-66. Do we know what the code name was for this aircraft or the actual name of this plane? This was the B-66 built by Douglas. It was a tactical bomber. Okay. The name of it was the Destroyer. It sounded like a basic. You know what that name, the B-66 Destroyer. It sounds like a Marvel comic book character. I'm the Destroyer. You know. It had wing pylon technology on it. There was another aircraft that had that wing pylon technology. It was developed from the A-3 Sky Warrior. The Sky Warrior was a Navy aircraft, and the aircraft, this one here, first flight was in 1954. And it was retired in 1975. You can still see this plane. There are no flying of these types of aircraft that I'm talking about, many of these. But you can go to many museums around the country and see them. This plane flew a lot during the Cuban Missile Crisis and in the Vietnam War. In the Vietnam War, they were known as RB-66B destroyers. It was a light bomber, but it was also used as radar jamming. The A-3, the Sky Warrior, I'm going to bring you up that one. is the same plane, same looking type of aircraft, okay? But it had a total different look. I'm going to bring up both photos so you guys can see one next to each other. And you'll see the differences between the both. Let me bring this one here down. I'll put it right over my face. You can take a look at them there. You can see that both of them, they pretty much look the same. The B-66 had the same wing, same motors, same tail configuration, pretty much the same fuselage. The only difference is that the A3 had a bubble-style canopy, carried the same amount of people on board, and the A3 was the largest aircraft to be kept on board an aircraft carrier. Aircraft carriers were still in their, aircraft carriers had morphed from the World War II carriers that you see today to the large super carriers of the Theodore Roosevelt and Nimitz class carriers. And in between, there was the Forestalls, the Saratogas, the Independence, the Enterprise. These carriers were smaller, but they carried this aircraft on board. This thing was huge. I'll put a link in the description box below of a video that you guys can watch of some of them operating. The A3, which was built by the Douglas Company, right next to the B-66 destroyer, was manufactured from 1956 to 1961. First flight was in 1952. And the aircraft flew, you're never going to guess. I know you guys are never going to guess how long. There was a total of 282 aircraft. How long did this plane stay in service? Does anyone know? I'm not going to give it away. I'm going to let you guys figure it out. But I will, once somebody tells me, I'll tell you if you're right. Now, the destroyer, there was 294 of these planes built. Now, the destroyer only flew until 1975. The A3 flew a lot longer. Again, does anybody know how long this aircraft lasted till? When was this aircraft retired? You guys can look it up. While I get our next plane ready. I'll let you guys sit on that one for a moment. But you don't know? Come on, guys. You can figure this one out. This one's easy. I'll give you a hint. I'll give you all a hint. It was between... We had just started the first Gulf War. When was the first Gulf War? That Ronald Reagan decided to invade. Or, I'm sorry. Iraq invaded Kuwait. And we had to go to war. We had to get together a coalition force to go and oust them. But we never got them out of power until George Bush Jr. came in. When was that time period? Little history tidbit there. Anybody know? Exactly, Norm, you're correct. In 1991, this plane retired. It retired. Now it's a long career for that little airplane. Well, 1954 to 1975 was the B-66, Colin. But the A3 flew in the carrier and also flew in the Air and Navy Reserves until 1991. 1991. But, of course, we all know there's only one bomber from the Cold War from the 1960s that competed against the XB-60. The B-52 was the longest-serving military bomber, strategic bomber aircraft to serve in the U.S. military as of now. It's almost like the Navy frigate Constitution. The USS Constitution is the largest serving Navy ship. It's used as a training ship, but it's still in the U.S. Navy inventory, and they still take care of it at this time period. They still sail it around, and they use it on sailing cruises and as a training ship. Next one I'm going to show you guys one here, and I think you guys will get a kick out of this one. And yes, this was a bomber that was developed during the Cold War. It had a nickname, a very particular nickname. I actually built a plastic model, a resin model of this airplane. You know the name of this plane? This is just a concept that actually never made the first flight. It was dealing with cost overruns. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the Grumman A-12 Avenger II, also affectionately known as the Flying Dorito. So, this plane never made it into production. I think if it did be made into production, it would have really been a really cool looking plane to watch fly. Though I think eventually they would have redesigned it, and instead of putting those engines on the bottom, the nacelles would have, I think it would have turned into a small mini version of the B-2 bomber. Isn't that far out, Colin? Yeah, you guys can look it up. It's the A-12. Again, affectionately known as the Flying Dorito. It looks like a Dorito when it is in the air. It's actually developed not by Grumman. It was developed by a consortium of Grumman and McDonnell Douglas. But McDonnell Douglas was the one that actually created the aircraft. It was only a mock-up, and you can see the mock-up. It is, I think, at the Texas Air Museum. Let me see here. I've got it in my notes. Doesn't have it in my notes. Yep, it's at the Fort Worth Aviation Museum and McCam Airport. So it's parked there inside a hangar, and it's actually a wooden mock-up of the airplane. But the plane had a lot of promise. It was canceled because there were cost overruns and development of the computer software. The same computer software that developed this aircraft went into another strategic bomber, which is still flying as of today, and is actually used in another plane too. They don't talk about it, but we all know it's being used. The F-22 Raptor. It's an empanada. Yeah, exactly. So you had the computer software that was developed for this plane before it was built is the same one that was used in the F-22 Raptor later on and in the B-2 bomber. And this aircraft also was used in the F-117. You are correct. The F-117 was developed first and actually flew. And it was going to be used, a part of the software was going to be used in the A-12. But at $5 billion to make one airplane, Dick Cheney, we all know who Dick Cheney is, don't we all know who Dick Cheney is? We all know who Dick Cheney is. Dick Cheney decided, you know what, we're spending too much money, $5 billion on an airplane. They spend twice, 3 times as much on that stuff now. Decided the aircraft just wasn't going to make it, we'll cancel it. The Flying Diamond. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, F-111 is the Flying Diamond. But it's also known as something else. But we'll get into that in another conversation. So the next one we're going to talk about here, I want to talk about this one, even though it wasn't really technically a bomber. But it was. And it was designed as a purposeful bomber, but it never made it to production. Because I like showing you guys some of the planes that never really made it into production. So you can see some of the weird stuff that came out during the Cold War that you would see it in comic books. They anticipated this stuff so much that it was going to be a future aircraft that they would anticipate, and you would see it in comic books, like in Superman and in the Hulk series, all these planes that would come out. Check that one out. That is the XB-51. That's funky. And yes, that was an aircraft developed for the military, for our U.S. Air Force services. The XB-51 was developed by the Martin Corporation, which later became part of Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin. There were a total of 2 aircraft built. The first flight of this aircraft was in 1949, and it was eventually retired after much testing was done on the aircraft and was used for testing in 1956. They used it with JATO takeoff engines and so on. It was the Glenn L. Martin Company. It was developed as a bomber. It had a crew of 2. Give you a little bit of spec on this plane. So that black spot that you see on the top of the tail, just in front of the tail, that was the radar, which was pretty interesting. The 2 engines on the side, those were General Electric J47 GE13 turbojets. Maximum takeoff weight was 62,000 pounds. Gross weight with bomb load and everything. And then gross weight of the aircraft by itself was 57,000 pounds. Empty weight, in other words, no fuel, no bombs, just a pilot, was 30,000 pounds. Height of this aircraft from the floor to the tail was 17 feet. Wingspan of 53 feet and length of 85. Only had a crew of 2. Pilot and navigator. Notice the aircraft actually sat on the ground like a U-2 spy plane, one wheel in front of the other. It did not have a tricycle landing gear, not a it's a pretty unique looking plane. So, continuing on with the uniqueness, I'm going to talk to you guys and give you guys another one to show you. This airplane was designed as a bomber, but it later entered the Cold War. It was designed as a bomber, as a Navy bomber, but it was later developed into a patrol aircraft. And I'll show you why in a moment. This aircraft coming up, excuse me, that is me making noises. Let's show you here. So the next aircraft I'm going to show you is a Navy aircraft. It was going to be developed as a bomber for the Navy, but became more of a patrol plane. It went into the patrol role was distinctive. and flew for a long, had a really nice career. And that's this bird right here. This is the P5M 2G Marlin. 285 of these aircraft were built. They served with distinction with the United States Navy, United States Coast Guard, and the French Navy. The aircraft incorporated a very unique design with gull wings. Where the engine you see, where the motor is, right below that pylon that's underneath where the motor sits, that was also a bomb bay door. Bomb bays would open up from there, and your mission payloads would drop out from it. You could either drop rafts, flares, food, torpedoes, or depth charges, depending on the role it was being flown in. This aircraft was given the design features on it, as you can see, has been used extensively in the Chinois, which flies for the Chinois is the Japanese patrol plane. Total of 285 aircraft were built. Aircraft flew from 1948 to 1967. Some were still seen around up until the 1970s, and then late, almost into the 1980s with the French Navy. But the airplane really did fly really well and flew long into service. There are some, I believe there's one in the Pima Museum. If you ever get a chance, you can go out there. And there's one at the Naval, there's one at the Naval Air Museum in Pensacola. So you can see one. I thought the Pima Museum had one, but I guess they don't anymore. I guess the only surviving one was the one that was delivered to it was later delivered. I got a tongue twister there. Let me get some water here. It was developed and shipped off to the Naval Air Station Pensacola, which they have a beautiful museum, which I hope to be able to go to sometime in the future. Okay, guys, I'm going to show you our last plane of the night. And because we're getting a little late and we're going into almost like an overtime here. No, not the P3 Orion. We're not going to show the P3 Orion. I'll show the P3 Orion on the next one. I guess we'll have a part 2 of this series, because it looks like it was a very Pepe Le Pew Skunk Works. Yeah, the F-117 was a Pepe Le Pew Skunk Works aircraft. You know what? Being that we're doing this and having so much fun with it, we'll have a part 2 of this series next week. Part 2. We'll also incorporate not only Cold War bombers, we'll incorporate a little bit of Cold War fighters too. Early Cold War fighters, not the newer stuff like the F-14s or anything like that. Early Cold War fighters, because I think you guys would get a kick out of some of the stuff I'll pull up. But the last one tonight we're going to look at is actually one that flew and is still flying today with NASA. But this aircraft was not designed or developed by the Americans. Do you know the name of this plane? This was a tactical bomber. I'm going to give you guys some hints here. First aircraft introduction date was 1954. And it flew with different air forces up until 1985. This is, wait for it, The B-57 Canberra, built by Martin Aircraft, which later became General Dynamics, which is General Dynamics, if anybody doesn't know, developed the F-16 fighter jet. 50 years of the F-16. The Canberra was also used in Britain. The Canberra was a unique plane. The engines used on this aircraft required a shotgun shell to start up. So you load the shotgun shell and the operator inside would shoot a button. This thing would smoke like crazy. You would hear a cannon blast go off, and the engine would kickstart the engine, the turbine in the engine. There are some videos that you can look online. The British Air Force had one. They were British built. They were known as B-2 Canberras. Same layout as you see this aircraft. During the Air Force, during the Vietnam War, they were painted black because they flew at night, so they could not be seen. They were also used in the later half of a little bit of the Korean War, but not very much. The B-57E, the nose was used for missile testing. And there is one flying still today, I believe still, with NASA. Don't quote me on that. I'm going to look it up really quickly. Yes. The NASA flying over the Gulf of Mexico. There's a photo here that I found. But you can look it up yourself. Look up the B-57F. That was the last one to fly. The Pakistani Air Force flew it. The Taiwanese Air Force flew it. And so did the United States and the Brits. There are a number of them sitting as gate guards still to this day. And there's a number of them sitting at different museums. You can go to the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Also in Montana, they have one at the air park. They have one sitting outside in the air park at Dyess Air Force Base. South Dakota Air and Space Museum has one. Little Rock Air Force Base has one. So there's a number of these. You could go and take a look at different Air Force bases, and they have them sitting outside. So that's about it. That's all we're going to talk about today. That's a lot of planes, guys. That is a B-47 Canberra. I mean, it was really interesting. You could actually... There's a video online of them turning the thing on, and what it is, they would put the shotgun shell. As a matter of fact, I have a book here called Vietnam Air War Debrief, and next week we'll talk about, I'll go into a little bit more detail, and I'll show you a couple of the pictures. I'll remember to write it down and show you guys a picture of the B-47 starting up. The B-57 starting up. Man, it would just make a loud noise, and you would see the black smoke and everything. So we're going to talk about, next week we're going to delve still into Cold War. Now, the Cold War as we know it is still, not as we know it, is morphed into something else. It went on a hiatus, okay, during the 1990s, and then Vladimir Putin got elected. The really nice man all the way over there in Russia. That nice guy. He got elected, and he's been elected ever since. They had a so-called president before during 2008, but he wasn't really, he was just a puppet. We all know what puppets look like. So now we have Vladimir Putin running the show over there. And the Cold War morphed from being one of back and forth who could make the better bomber to who could make the better strategic bomber to who could make the better fighter, and has moved into the cyberspace role. And that's what has gone on. So, guys, we did a nice long show today, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you're watching on playback, please hit the thumbs up. Guys, make sure you hit the thumbs up down there. Helps out with the algorithm. If you're not a subscriber and you're watching this for the first time, subscribe to the show. And when you put the little bell icon with the little icons on there, it'll alert you when I go live so you guys can join in. Yes, it was a great show, and I'm so happy that you guys joined in and everybody joined in the conversation. It was a lot of fun. And I look forward to next week's show. Just a quick reminder, we're dealing with the hurricane over here. Hurricane's supposed to be showing up here on Wednesday. We're all grasping our breaths, hoping that it's not that bad. But if by chance I lose power and I cannot get online, I will make sure to let you guys know. I'll probably have the show on my phone if I can't get on the computer here. But we'll let you guys know how things are going on. And I will hope that everybody Yes, thank you very much. Just answering Colin. I just needed to read what you said there. I really do appreciate everybody joining in on the conversation tonight. But again, I will make sure that to give you guys a heads up. Next week, next show will be part 2 of this series, Cold War. Did it really end? And Cold War aircraft. We're going to talk about fighters. And we're going to talk a little bit about the bombers. And we'll see how it goes. Guys, thank you very much for watching tonight. It was a lot of fun. And I hope you guys join me on the next one. Have a great week. Have a good weekend. God bless y'all. And be kind to everybody else. And be kind to one another. Model Man Frank out, guys. Thanks for joining up. Have a good one.